What was a moment in your life that felt like a horror movie scene? I went on a really deep woods hike for only the second time in my life. My GPS broke and I had to rely on my compass. I got turned around a few times because I couldn't remember the direction I came from and it was getting dark. I lost the trail. The woods are weirdly silent when you're alone in the dark. It was around 2 a.m. by the time I found the trailhead. Story 2. I was a baby in a car seat between my cousins in the back seat. My dad was driving. This was in the 80s, and it was my aunt's insistence that I be in the seat, even though I was like 5. A sleeping semi-truck driver was coming into our lane, and there was a cliff on the other side. My dad did some amazing driving, but the semi still hit us. I was uninjured, sitting in the seat and swinging my legs while everyone else was unconscious. They all woke up groaning. My dad didn't wake up. Long story short, everyone had only minor scrapes, and my dad had a broken leg. But the crunch of metal in those few seconds or minutes of being the only alive person were quite fear-inducing. Story 3. 2 days after my now boyfriend told me he liked me, he fell from a zipline and broke his back. He almost passed away. 6 months later, he was in a car wreck caused by an intoxicated driver and almost passed away again. 6 months after that, he passed out and had to have emergency brain surgery, where he again almost passed away. I now have severe anxiety, separation anxiety, and PTSD. That whole year was a nightmare. We're both okay now. The brain injury was almost a year ago, but TBIs take a while to heal, so he still has side effects. Thankfully, our relationship is still strong. He's physically getting better, and I'm healing emotionally, too. Luckily for him, the trauma of the injuries has caused him to forget the majority of the pain and memories of those incidents. Story 4. Driving home from work at 23, I was listening to my favorite song. I pulled up to a red light and saw a guy on a motorcycle coming up next to me in the other lane. I rolled down my window to compliment his bike when he stopped. He didn't, and ran the red light. He hit a car going at least 55 miles per hour. His motorcycle shattered apart. He went flying, hit the hood of another car, and landed on the ground before rolling into the curb. He wasn't wearing a helmet. The car he hit with his motorcycle was totaled. I had to step over his body to talk to the police. He was still alive when they got there. I regret not holding his hand. It was just a normal day, and all of a sudden it felt like the rug was pulled out from under me. It was only 18. Story 5. My dad came home spiked off his butt. Not unusual, and when I wouldn't let him into my little brother's room to say goodnight, we got into it, which was also not unusual. He was trying to force his way past me, and he's at least 2 times my size on a good day, so I just tried to divert his attention to steer him away from my brothers. It wasn't hard to get him angry about something else, and he carried me more than dragged me outside. I was trying to get away, but just got slammed into the wall a few times for my trouble. In our neighborhood, nobody's going to call the police on you, so he wasn't worried about taking it outside to avoid a little extra property damage. I don't remember what he was yelling about, and I don't really care. I was kicking as much as I could and got in a couple of good shots, but he just put more of his weight on me. My older brother, who was 18 at the time, got home from work maybe a few minutes into the fight. He usually got back just before my father did, and the two of us were almost always able to de-escalate him without too much trouble. I remember him coming down the street basically just barreling into my dad to tackle him off me. My brother is a pretty wiry guy, but he has some muscle on him and is a much better match for our father. My dad pulled his gun and I panicked and tried to take him down from behind. I broke a bottle over his head and we were both trying to wrestle him down. Got a couple of shots off, which caught my brother off guard enough to get the upper hand. I stomped on his forearm hard enough to get the gun out of play. I don't even remember who was hurt and how at that point. I can piece things together looking back, but all I remember is a heck of a lot of adrenaline. I'm not even sure I was really scared. I know some of our neighbors were out on their porches watching. That's how people tend to react to this sort of thing here. Between my brother and I, we got our dad out cold after a couple of good hits of his head on the asphalt, but we got at least as good as we gave. This is where things start getting really hazy, and I'm not quite sure how conscious I was or how much I don't remember. My brother would be next to me, and I'd blink, and he'd be gone, and I couldn't really hear anything except myself breathing, like I was underwater or something. In the years since, my brother has filled me in somewhat on the details, so as far as I can piece things together, this is what happened. My brother checked to make sure our dad was really unconscious and that I was vaguely coherent. Then he ran inside and told our little brother to hide and not leave their room no matter what. When he came back outside, he said he knew he had to call the police. This was the worst fight the three of us had ever gone into, and it was the first time my brother and I couldn't just stitch each other up and be okay. I was and am still a minor, and he knew CPS would get involved if the police knew my father had hurt me. My brother and I have always worked hard to avoid CPS intervention and the high risk of being separated from our little brothers and each other. My brother got me up, slid me into the driver's side of my dad's car, and told me to step on the gas and keep going until I crashed. I don't remember this, but apparently the message got through. I think I hit someone else's car pretty hard as they came down the street in the other direction. My brother called 911 and reported the car accident and that he and my dad had gone into a bad physical fight. The next thing I remember is waking up in the hospital. I nearly passed away, and from the fact that my brother still won't tell me his own injuries, I assume he was about as close. They wouldn't let me see my brother or father, and I thought they were gone. I learned later that they'd both been arrested. Both were eventually convicted and sentenced. The night we were fighting was the last time I touched my brother. I wish I'd hugged him. Story 6. My 18th birthday was a horror movie. To explain, my biological father essayed me. He was arrested, and I moved in with my older brother and mother. During court, he walked in with a Bible. He was told that he could not contact me or my brother at any time until one of us turned 18. He received some amount of jail time, and I never heard from them until my brother's 18th birthday. My brother received a friend request on Facebook from my biological dad because he was out of jail and wanted a second chance. My brother blocked him. I dreaded the thought of my biological dad contacting me on my 18th birthday. On my birthday, I sat in front of my phone, waiting for a phone call or a friend request, anything I didn't recognize. 12 hours went by and nothing. I've never felt so much relief in my entire life. It's now 2021 and I haven't gotten a single call or friend request. Story 7. I was about 8 years old at the time, and it was something like 1 or 2 in the morning. I went to the bathroom and it was quite bright outside despite the time. I was sitting on the toilet, playing with the current. It came up enough and saw a shadow standing outside the window. I screamed and my mom came running. I told her there was someone standing outside the bathroom window. Now, my mom, being the crazy person she is, threw open the curtain and opened the window, ready to fight a person. Guy outside the window? Nope, a freaking bear. The window was probably shut, and I was quickly ushered out of the bathroom. This event furthered the on and off talks my parents had been having about moving. On a side note, we moved about 2 years later for several other reasons. Funny enough, there is now a bear roaming this neighborhood. It has been spotted on my parents' front porch at least twice now. Story 8. My dad had just gone home from a second job as a cashier at the truck stop across the street from my house. He worked from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. and had gone off at 3 a.m. Around 3:45 a.m., my mom called me into her room to look out the window and see what the flashing lights were about. Cops regularly stopped people there, so I didn't think much of it. I tried calling my dad to see what was going on this time, but there was no answer. I looked back out the front door toward the station and saw cops putting up caution tape. That had never happened for any stops there before. I told my mom I was leaving and got in my car to drive over. I parked to the side and ran to the back door, which was locked, and then ran around to the front where a crowd of people and cops were standing outside the tape. My dad was not one of those people. I asked what had happened, and they told me that there had been a robbery and the cashier had been fired at. I told them the cashier was my dad. I wasn't allowed to go in because it was still a crime scene. The police officer told me he had been combative when they got there, saying that he was fine and could get his wallet for his ID by himself. They rolled him out on the stretcher. I don't remember him talking. I think they may have sedated him or he was just unconscious. The EMTs asked which hospital we preferred, and they left with him. Called my mom and told her to get dressed, that my dad had been shot and we were going to the hospital. We were at the hospital for the next day or so. The doctors attempted several surgeries to decrease the swelling in his brain from the gunshot, but it wasn't working. His eyes were swollen shut and purple from the pressure. Eventually, we were told that he likely would not have any brain function from all of the damage and was taken off life support. He, my mom, and I just bought a new house 28 days before this. He had been through so much with a move and my mom's health problems. We were basically homeless for a few weeks during the move. We were also happy to be in the new home instead of our old one that had been falling apart for years. That didn't last very long. I'm sorry if this isn't the kind of horror story you're looking for, but it's my horror story. Story 9. When I was about 13, I had to stay home alone every day after school. My parents worked. One day, there was a knock at the door. I didn't answer, obviously, because I was just a kid, and whoever it was started slowly trying to turn the locked doorknob. I called my mom after they left, and while I was on the phone with her, the back door started getting kicked down. As I was frantically trying to tell her I needed help, the phone call dropped, and I just had to run. For those wondering, we had an alarm system, so luckily when it started going off, it scared them off. I was luckily able to run to my neighbor's house for help, but we still, to this day, have no idea who it was. Story 10. I was maybe 10 years old and part of the choir at my local church. In the evenings, the church also acted as an amateur dramatics venue for various performances. One play involved having a choir, which was handy, as the church knew just how to get hold of some good extras. So I had to perform for the late evening showings. Because the main entrance meant walking past paying customers, I had to enter through the back door of the church, which was through the graveyard. It was like a freaking trope. Got a few meters into the graveyard and my crappy torch back then. This was in the days of rubbish filament bulbs that were delicate and sucked batteries dry fast. I immediately convinced myself something was creeping up behind me in the dark. Started running. Of course, I swore I could hear my stalker keeping pace. Panic. I was running full tilt through a pitch-black graveyard. I ran at full speed into a low, stone table-type grave. I hit both shins and then face planted hard into the top of the grave. Adrenaline is amazing. I didn't feel a thing. I got straight back up and ran in a full circle until it came out of the other side of the church and back into the streetlight. I stood there panting and realizing I needed to go back around to get to the door. I decided screw it and noped out, going home instead. The adrenaline wore off on the walk home, then it hurt. Story 11. When I was a kid, I spent a few years living on a property with my grandparents and great-grandparents. It was way up in the backcountry, down a dirt road, and one of the few old properties nestled in a national park. There was a real deliverance vibe to the place. We were fairly isolated, but we often had issues with feral dogs. Pig hunters would illegally hunt in the national park, and if their dogs got wounded, they'd just turn them loose in the park. The surviving dogs would form into feral packs, and they'd attack livestock. My grandpa's neighbor was a bit of a nutter. He used to sit at his fence and take potshots at strange cars that came too close to his gate. Aside from that, he was a real sweet old guy and he was always nice to me. I used to ride my bike to the school bus stop, and on the way home, I'd always stop for a chat. I don't think I ever saw him without his old Lee Enfield rifle in his hand. Anyway, I was 12 and I'd picked up a part-time job at the bakery or cafe in town, just a few hours a week after school. But it meant that in the winter, I was sometimes riding home after it got dark and foggy. I was riding my bike home in the dark. I came around the corner and saw something hanging in the trees, lots of somethings lining the road. The old guy next door had spent a few weeks shooting every pig dog he could find, and then he'd hung the corpses in the trees along the road outside his property. It was scary as heck. Story 12. It was a dark and quiet morning when I came to volunteer at the library. Usually no one came around at that time. I signed in and went off to my newly assigned section. It was so dusty and messy, no one had probably been that deep into the library in a long time. I put on my music and did my work until suddenly I heard something. There was a man an aisle down who was looking at me. He was tall, with long, disheveled hair and dark, beady eyes. How long had he been standing there? I had started the shift maybe 10 minutes ago. I never felt such a feeling before, but I got the sense that he had ended someone before. I continued with my work and occasionally glanced at the man, who appeared to be getting closer each time I looked back at him. He continued to stare at me. I was so deep in the library I didn't think the security guard would hear me if I screamed. I was completely on my own. I finished my work and decided to quickly run around the corners for somewhere safe. I zigzagged around the shelves as much as possible. The best place I could find to hide was the bathroom. I locked it. I waited for the time when more patrons would come into the library. The man appeared to be gone. I spent the rest of my shifts at the library on edge. Story 13. My parents were once robbed at gunpoint while they were on the night shift at the clinic where they worked. My father was in the butt of the gun and my mom was chained to some furniture. Luckily, that was the worst of it, but it traumatized my mom so badly that she developed PTSD and started becoming paranoid of everyone and everything. She quit her job and would stay indoors all the time, locking every window and door. We lived in a plot surrounded by a stone fence where my father's side of the family lived, and we rented the apartment above their garage while our house was being built right next door. One night, after making sure everything was locked, we went inside for supper at around 8 p.m. when we started hearing someone screaming and knocking on the garage door like a madman. 5, 10, 15 minutes passed and they wouldn't give up. My mom was scared out of her wits for herself, but also for her kids. My older brother, me, and my little brother who was around 4 back then, as we were the only ones in at the time. The banging and screaming stopped for a minute, but then this crazy person started throwing stones over the fence and into our sliding doors, still hollering like a monkey in a fight. My mom couldn't take it anymore, so she instructed us to put on a jacket and go out into the house being built to hide. We went inside the construction site, barely able to see ahead because she was afraid to turn on a flashlight. She told us to tuck ourselves into a corner of the smallest room, a bathroom now, and grab hold of any steel poles just all laying around to defend ourselves. She then instructed my older brother to climb on her to see if there was anyone down the street. Her plan was to have us climb over the wall and go to a friend's house. My little brother and I were clutching these steel poles for dear life, and it was so quiet that we were able to hear my brother whisper that there was a man walking down the street towards us. Couldn't see who it was. So then my mom put him down, handed him another pole, and told us to keep real quiet. A few more minutes passed and we heard nothing. So my mom decided to take a peek herself, and as she was preparing to hoist herself up, the shadow of a man wearing a gabardine, swishing and spurting around him with a Batman effect, hurled himself over the wall where we were. A scream of sheer terror. I'll never forget that sound. It was pure luck that the shock of the shadowy man and my mom's scream made us freeze for a second, or my uncle would have been harmed by steel poles. It turns out that he had forgotten his own key and he couldn't get in, so instead of resorting to ringing the doorbell like any other sane person would, he started hurling himself against the door, screaming, throwing stones, and then climbing the fence of our adjacent house to get in. Then, as if that wasn't enough, he started shouting at us for locking the door when he hadn't arrived yet. None of us slept that night. My mom was a sobbing mess, and my dad was furious with my uncle for his behavior, and he refused to apologize until much later. He always had anger management issues. We moved into the countryside not a month after. Story 14. I was hanging out alone at home, listening to music in the living room. The house was a single-level ranch, and I was 20 at the time. My sister came home and noticed a man popping his head up and looking in the large living room window. She was a bit intoxicated, so I thought she was imagining it. Nevertheless, we decided to close and lock all the windows and sleep in the same bedroom. I went to the back bedroom at the other end of the house to lock the window and found it open, with the screen removed from its tracks, suggesting someone tried to get in from outside. The music I was listening to was loud, so I would not have heard someone enter and approach until they were upon me. I guess they heard my sister come home, came around to the front to look in the window, and then took off. Creeps me out to know this person might have watched me from the front window without my noticing and then proceeded to the back window to break in. I always wonder what would have happened if my sister didn't come home and she did. I don't think robbery was the intent if it was clear that I was in the house. If you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos like this. Story 15. One time we wanted to go out to eat, so we picked a little diner that we had never been to before. There was one car in the lot, didn't really think much of it, so we went on in. When we entered, there was a key in the door. Nobody was in the building. All the lights were on and the fans were going. There were even pies in the display case to be sold. It was so creepy. We called out, but nobody was there. We quickly left. That happened probably in either 2008 or 2009, and to this day, I still want to know what happened there and why it was like that. Story 16. I was very pregnant and asleep when I started dreaming that mariachi music was blasting outside, and I realized it wasn't a dream, and I was angry. It was 3 a.m. Why the heck was some person blasting mariachi music? So I went outside to give that person a piece of my mind in my bathrobe. He was in the apartment driveway in the beaten-up, white, old minivan. I ran up to him and asked what his problem was when he turned to look at me. His eyes were out. He'd been held up at gunpoint. I grew up hanging out in sketchy neighborhoods, so I don't get scared. I ran back into my apartment and spent the next month terrified that he knew where I lived. That man's soul was evil. Story 17. My best friend and I went jet skiing one time with a girl we barely knew. I was uncomfortable with the whole situation. I was putting my life in the hands of a complete stranger, and I had a weird feeling about this person from the day I met her. Something just seemed off. My best friend, who was a very trusting person, insisted that we go so we could get to know this girl better. Being a good friend, I didn't want her going by herself. We skied out to an island so that we could go wave jumping in the open water. I went out wave jumping with this girl for about 15 minutes. The waves were incredibly rough, and I began to feel unsafe. After a close call with a large wave, I suggested we go back. Instead of leaving when we got back to the island, the girl proceeded to take my best friend out on the waves. They didn't come back. I sat on that island for 3 hours in turmoil until I was picked up by the police. The first 15 minutes after the girls left, I was okay. By 30 minutes, I was worried, and by 45 minutes, I was panicking. The only phone in the waterproof case was the girl's, and I didn't know her passcode. The police ended up calling me on her phone, and my heart sank to my stomach. The ski had tipped, and they had treaded water for an hour, then proceeded to almost drown in a riptide. The worst thing about the ordeal was that the girl knew how unsafe the conditions were and had been warned by multiple people not to go out in the water that day. Still get furious thinking about how I almost lost my best friend. Sitting helplessly on that island with no clue as to what happened, no phone access, and no sign of rescue was awful. Well, I felt like a horror movie during those hours. Story 18. I've written about this a couple of times before, but it's still one of my most memorable and horrifying experiences. We were having a family outing with my mom, aunts, uncles, and cousins at the beach. I was maybe 8, and my 6-year-old cousin wandered into the waves and was immediately pulled under. I did everything I could to get an adult's attention, but they all ignored me. I grabbed my boogie board and ran to the water. He was getting spun and flipped around underwater, but I was able to grab him and put him on the board as we both got pulled out by what turned out to be a riptide. He screamed and screamed as we were pulled further and further out, but nobody heard us. We were so far out that all the people on the beach looked like dots. After what seemed like an hour, probably only 30 minutes or so, I was getting tired and it was really hard to keep my cousin calm. I didn't want him to be scared, but I was getting desperate. Finally, what seemed to be out of nowhere, I noticed 2 men with long hair suddenly sprinting toward the water's edge with surfboards in hand. They both jumped on their boards and paddled out right for us. They snatched us up out of the water and put us on their boards. It was only when we were halfway back to shore that our families even noticed we were gone. That same cousin whom I saved took his own life a few months ago, and this memory is hitting in a whole different way now. Story 19. I was freediving in about 20 to 25 feet of water. We were 9 miles from shore, down at Hen and Chicken's Reef outside of Tavernier Key. We anchored about 100 feet from the reef. I was 16. I had an amazing, to me, underwater disposable camera, and I dived to the bottom, wait as long as I could for a good shot, take a picture or two, and go back up for air. Back then I could hold my breath for about 3 to 4 minutes if I did everything perfectly. I got a few pictures of sea turtles, grouper, an awesome eel, and a bunch of other stuff. So one time I went down and found a fish that looked like Dory from Finding Nemo. I was trying to time a camera click to one of her swimming pauses when she suddenly just bolted away into the reef. Guess I scared her. Thought for about 2 whole seconds. Everything had bolted for the reef. Even the eel I had gone way too close to for a picture was hiding. Realizing this was the part in the movie where the shark rips the first person to shreds, I turned around nice and slow to discover that not 2 feet behind me was a 7-foot-long great barracuda with a body as big as one of my giant bicycling thighs. There were 4 more behind him, a bit further away, but he was just determined to see what I was doing at his reef. I stayed and turned around and slowly brought the camera up and took picture after picture, desperately hoping that at least one of them would come out as amazing as what I was seeing. They did not. Not a single one. The whole time I was taking pictures, he was drifting closer. Not swimming, just light tail flicks. I couldn't tell if he thought I was something else or if he thought I was going to feed him. I put the camera in my dive pouch, a little mesh bag that attaches to your belt that I used mostly for trash I found on the reef, and decided to see if he'd let me pet him. I almost did. I got stupid close, but the way he looked at my hand told me it wasn't the best idea. I wish I had. Then I'd either have a perfect ending to the story or at least a cool scar. It was awesome. I really want to get back one day. I haven't been back to the sea since then. It's been too long. Hope you like the story. I never got to tell it before. Thanks for reading. Story 20. I was alone in my house at night, and at about 3 a.m., I woke up to something moving and making noise downstairs. I called 911 immediately. Once they arrived, they said the door was locked and asked if I was sure someone was inside. I insisted, and at my request, they broke down the door. A short scuffle arose before a police officer knocked on my door and told me to come out. I did, and he told me I should leave my house for the rest of the night and that I didn't need to see what was in the kitchen. I insisted again, and then I saw the entire room was coated in plastic. The man had several saws, knives, rope, bags, and sleeping pills. He was planning to harm me. Apparently, he was a man who was wanted for 2 crimes, so that was nice. Story 21. I didn't experience this, but my family did because of me. We had a trip to the mountains with a bunch of family to enjoy the snow. I was just a kid and I'd wandered away up the hill with a walking stick. I broke my stick by stabbing it into the ground and just kicked around in the snow. I got bored and followed my own footsteps back down the hill, went to the car and took a nap. My sister noticed I was nowhere to be seen and my family went looking for me. They followed the trail I left and found my broken stick in the play area. They probably freaked out, thinking I got caught in a mini avalanche or fell into a small hole and dug in the snow looking for me. I honestly don't remember if I got in trouble, but I do remember that they were more relieved that I was okay. Story 22. This is an unconventional point of view, but one winter afternoon I attended a workshop where we made simple bows. The workshop took place in a town about a half an hour's train ride away. When it ended, I traveled back to my hometown. It was winter, so I was literally covered up from head to toe with a hat, scarf, coat, gloves, etc., and they were all coincidentally black. I also had an unstrung bow in my hand, which basically just looked like a stick. It was also pretty dark when the train arrived in my hometown, despite not really being late. I typically walk a bit faster than most people by default. As I was walking along the road from the station, I saw a woman with a small child about pelvis height, walking beside her and holding her hand. They were a good distance ahead of me, but since they were going the same way as me, as I was walking faster than them, I slowly but steadily gained on them. The little kid occasionally looked back and looked back more often as I got fairly close to them, maybe 10 meters behind them. At this point, the kid just started running forward, pulling his mom to go faster for a bit as they gained some distance again, then slowed down to the regular speed, which was still slower than my walking speed. The station itself is about half a kilometer away from the main area of the town, as you need to go over a road bridge to get there. Anyway, the situation with the kid looking back repeatedly and pulling his mom forward with full childish force to escape the pursuer, who was just walking home, went on for maybe 300 of those 500 meters. I would start catching up. The kid would pull his mom forward, so she'd jog for a bit, then they'd continue walking as I continued to catch up, and it just kept happening. Since there's only one main road there, there's nowhere else to go to take a different path until you cross the long bridge. So I guess I coincidentally became the main antagonist in that kid's personal horror movie that night. Story 23. I was heading home from a casino out in the country when I heard something ticking in my tire, and I thought maybe I'd picked up a nail. I pulled onto the next exit, which quickly ended on a dirt road. I ended up in front of an abandoned schoolhouse, and what's more, a deep harvest moon was up, giving an eerie feeling everywhere. I was already uneasy when I got to check the wheel, and then I heard something heavy moving around the building. Instincts kicked in, screaming, heck no, I've seen this movie. I jumped in my car and punched it backward onto the road. I'd have driven on my rims if I had to be anywhere but there. Fortunately, it was just a pebble in my treads, but I wasn't about to chance it with whatever was out there. Story 24. My girlfriend said she had been having things happen that seemed like a ghost. We're both pretty scientific and skeptical of this kind of stuff, but after she said her TVs would turn on, I finally witnessed a bunch of lights turning on and off. I mostly shrugged it off since it's an old house, whatever. I went home and made a protein shake. I shook it, and on the count of 3, my lights turned off like a switch. Except it's impossible to switch those lights off as they are the kind that strictly and slowly fade in and out. The light turned on when I hit them, and then my TV started turning off by itself. None of this had ever happened before. Story 25. I was at my cabin, which is a half-mile from any neighbors on the lake. I'd been splitting wood in the afternoon and left the axe in the stump. Later that evening, a lightning storm appeared on the horizon. There was no rain, and it was totally silent, but there were tons of lightning flashes. My wife and I were sitting in the dark watching it because it was cool. She turned to me and said she was getting a little freaked out. I was too, so we turned on the lights. They were on for maybe 5 seconds, and then the power went out. We got really freaked out. I quickly locked all the doors. We started getting ready for bed and calmed down. When we went into the bedroom, which looks out over the woodpile, the lightning strike perfectly framed the axe and the stump in the window. We spent the next however long watching every lightning flash to make sure the axe was still there, freaking ourselves out every time that it would be gone, just like in a movie. Story 26. 25 years ago, my ex-husband and I were traveling from Nevada to West Virginia by car. In Arkansas, we drove through a little town called Brinkby. It was late spring, warm and still light outside. We were hungry and tired and decided to get some dinner and stop for the night. Brinkby initially seemed like a charming little town. We went through the local McDonald's, and that's when things started getting weird for us. While we were ordering, we heard what sounded like a gunshot followed by a woman screaming. I know we heard it because we both looked at each other and said, "What the heck?" at the same time. Then we looked at the 50-ish woman taking our order, didn't bat an eye, and had absolutely no expression on her face. When my husband asked if she had heard that, the only thing she said was, "Would there be anything else?" No, thank you. After we paid for our food, we drove down this nice tree-lined main street. It wasn't well off, but it was definitely well kept. There were no fancy cars, but no rust buckets and no people. At that time of year, kids should have been out playing, riding bikes, etc. People should have been walking that lovely street. Nothing. No animals, no birds, no other cars on the road. No sounds, just nothing. Except for a strong feeling of being watched. We grew more and more uneasy. Finally, we found an old motel with a vacancy sign lit up and lights on inside. There were no cars in the parking lot. Still, no one to be seen, no movement inside. My ex and I sat in the car for a minute just looking at this place. At the exact time, we turned to each other and said, "Heck no." I was certain that if we stayed the night there, we'd be staying there permanently. There was just this palpable feeling of evil and fear that I'd never experienced before, nor have I felt since. I'm not one to always be tuned into the atmosphere around me, kind of live in my own little bubble, so this was really intense for me. As we drove away, we both felt the dread physically lift from the car. If it had just been me, I would have chalked it up to silliness, but my ex was in the military, and honestly, not much rattled him, especially very intangible things like this. We simply knew we were in danger. He told me later that it felt like we were characters in a horror movie who made it out alive, limping down the road and holding each other up for support. Despite being exhausted, we purposely drove another 2 hours before stopping for the night, just to be as far away from that place as we could. Screw Brankby, Arkansas. Story 27. When I was 16, I did a 1-year high school exchange program in Japan. When I arrived, it turned out my host family was in a Christian sect. They informed me that they had decided to host me because I came from a Christian country. I come from a progressive European country that is certainly not very religious. They used me as their housekeeper. I had to get up at 5 a.m. to do laundry, etc. My host mom was decidedly not mentally well. Once, she screamed at me for an hour for putting a towel too close to the toilet in the cupboard for towels, mind you. She also hit her 6-year-old daughter and berated her for not being good enough in school. The kid was dyslexic. Stay became more and more terrifying. My host mom kicked her daughter out of her own bedroom for me to stay in because I was smarter than the 6-year-old. My clothes were taken away and I was forced to wear Christian clothes. Preppy skirts, light colors. I was not allowed to brush my hair within view of anyone because the act was dirty. My host mom was a friend of my contact in the exchange organization, and my calls were under surveillance from my host mom, so I couldn't reach out to anyone. When I did, I was told I was lying. Since my host sister was being mistreated, she was not doing well. I tried to be kind to the girl, and I think she felt very safe around me. One day, I'd taken her home from school. My host mom was still at work. The little girl just lost it for some reason. Started screaming, crying, and hitting me. It was intense. I was 16 and had no idea what to do. She was acting like an injured animal. After a while of this, I went into the bedroom and closed the door because she was being so aggressive toward me. I heard a commotion in the kitchen and got worried she hadn't calmed down, but rather was trying to put on the gas stove or something dangerous that could hurt her. I opened the door and looked out down the hallway. What I saw was straight out of a horror movie. This little Japanese girl was running toward me in her Catholic schoolgirl uniform, holding a huge knife and screaming at the top of her lungs. I bolted, shoeless, out of the apartment. Sakura was running after me with a knife. The elevator doors barely managed to close as she was stabbing the doors with a knife. Most of all, I remember her eyes. They were completely wide, black, and blank. It was like she was in a different world. I spent several hours sitting in the lobby, crying until my host mom got home. What happened afterward was completely surreal. I refused to go back into the apartment. After hours of arguing, the contact person in the exchange organization was finally called. I demanded to be put somewhere else right now. The lady finally complied, and I was convinced to go back into the apartment to wait for her to pick me up. My host mom hid and screamed at her daughter, then she instructed me to sit on a kitchen chair in the middle of the living room. I was not allowed to move, and the host mom got down on the floor and rolled around screaming and crying for me and God to forgive her. This went on for hours. She was completely psychotic, and I was scared out of my freaking mind. I got picked up and placed in a different host home. The 3 months I lived with this Christian family were never spoken of again. Story 28. I was in the Czech Republic for work and hopped in the bus to the hotel, except it was headed in the wrong direction. It immediately got on the freeway. No cell service and no Google Maps. We were probably 25 kilometers out in the middle of nowhere with no gas stations or anything. I saw a train station that looked like it was from World War II, so I hopped off. These little kids, about 10 years old, were standing outside smoking cigarettes and eyeing me. I went in and repeated the name of the city to the ticket guy, and he pointed to the exit. I got outside, and there were 3 trains. It was getting dark, and I started asking everyone if they spoke English. I finally found a chain-smoking pregnant woman who told me the train I needed. I came to find out it was the last train back for the night. I made it back, but wow. Story 29. About 15 of us were staying at a friend's rundown lake house, but we expected a few more people. It was 4th of July weekend, so we shot some fireworks, drank about 30 beers apiece, and got as hell before heading to bed around 2 a.m. About 30 minutes into us trying to pass out, a car rolled up slowly without its lights on, and no one recognized it. We were all paranoid as we watched 5 guys in masks pile out of the sedan and head toward the rotted front door. Then they knocked. There were like 8 guys in that tiny house at that point, and not a single one volunteered to answer. So myself and another guy were nominated. We heard them softly call out the name of the guy who owned the place, which was just the worst. Eventually, we opened the door and saw them, all wearing cardboard John Malkovich masks, and asked what the heck they wanted. They pulled them off and turned out to be the guys we were expecting earlier. They'd gotten lost and decided, since they happened to have the masks, that they would mess with us. Being John Malkovich had come out about a week earlier, and the masks were a theater giveaway. It worked. We ended up staying up a bit later with him, laughing about it. Well, if you like these stories, here's more. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. Catch you in that video.